Hello and welcome to the Green Room podcast. I'm your host, Garon Green, and wherever you're listening today, thank you for being here. And before we begin, I want to share a brief word of caution because here in the Green Room, we don't always talk about the comfortable things. We talk about the things that sit underneath them, the experiences we sometimes hide, the parts of ourselves we don't always know how to talk about. And today's conversation goes into some particularly difficult places. And some of these episodes contain articles in regards to suicide, substance use, addictions, shame, recovery, and intense personal grief. Some of what you'll hear today comes from real life experiences, real stories, and real pains, and a real attempt to make sense of what happened. For some people, talking about these can be part of healing, but I also recognize that hearing them can bring things up for others. So if you're listening today and something starts to feel too heavy, please give yourself permission to pause, take a breath, and step away for a while. And you can come back another time if you need to. You don't have to listen to something simply because you started it. And if you're struggling right now, please consider reaching out to somebody you trust or seeking appropriate professional support. You don't have to carry everything alone. So welcome back to the Green Room podcast. I'm your host, Garon Green, and the Green Room is a place for honest conversations about what it means to be human, not the polished versions, not the Instagram versions, not the version where everything somehow works out perfectly at the end of the chapter. I'm interested in the tough times, the struggles, the failures, the losses and the mistakes, the moments where we don't know what we're doing, and ultimately the journey towards becoming more fully ourselves. Because I don't believe that our past has to define our future. Our experiences can shape us, they can leave marks on us, they can change the way we see ourselves and the world, but they don't necessarily have to become our whole story. And sometimes the chapters we most wish we could erase become the chapters that teach us the most. And that's what we're exploring today. We could be exploring failure, recovery, identity, and shame, and ultimately what it means to become whole, because sometimes another person's story can help us understand our own. And that's exactly what I hope today's conversation will bring us today. So today I'm joined by the one and only David Deane Haskell. David is an author and drummer living in Japan. His memoir, Wounded Angels, explores addictions, shame, recovery, and the long journey of finding his voice again. He is also the author of The Solarian Deep, a science fiction novel exploring humanity, technology, consciousness, and the future. But today, I don't simply want to talk about the books, I want to talk about the person behind them, the experiences that shaped him and the things that challenged him, the failures, the recovery, the questions, and perhaps the things he's still figuring out, because I think that's something we can all relate to. None of us really arrives. We're still becoming. So, David, thank you so much for spending the time and giving up your time to be a guest here on the Green Room podcast. So, welcome. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much, Garon. I don't feel that I'm giving up any time. I'm really happy to be spending this time with you and connecting. And it was a really lovely introduction. And I would say definitely it's a work in progress. I don't think I'll ever be done. I don't believe in that. I don't really believe in gurus anymore. I used to, but I think we're all, take a guru and put them in a stressful situation and we'll see what happens. Right. And so I have days when I'm, in the flow and I'm doing great. And I have days when I'm just about ready to, whatever, just go to bed, go to bed and forget that day ever happened,
Sure.
But,
I like your view when you said about the gurus. I'd like to have a conversation outside of here about that. That would,
Okay,
I think I'd
sure.
speak to you hours about that. I find that quite fascinating what you said there. So, and I've really been looking forward to this one because your work raises some really interesting questions, and I don't want this to feel like a traditional interview, if you like. I don't want to simply go, I want you to tell me about your book, tell me about this chapter. Tell me about that experience. And I want to talk about the person behind the words, the human being, the experiences, the mistakes, the recovery, and the things you've learned, and perhaps, the things you're still trying to understand. So if you're happy, I'd love to go back, before the books, before the writing, before everything kind of started falling into place. I'd love to go back to the young David. When you kind of look back, who was the young David? What do you remember about him, and what kind of child was David?
What kind of child was David, or what kind of child did they say I was? Right? Because like
Yeah,
I
I
think
like that.
I played the scapegoat role. That was largely how I got through life. And so if you asked me if what I was all about, I would say, oh, I have trouble making relationships. I'm not very charismatic. I'm kind of weird. I'm defiant. I blow up at people. I get angry, whatnot. All these kinds of things. I was a difficult child. Blah blah blah. None of that was true. I was stuck in a traumatic situation, and I also had caregivers that were unwell and didn't see their own unwellness, but they had no problem seeing mine. So it was that kind of a thing. So I mean, my childhood was frustrating, and I was very, very lonely because, as I wrote, there's a chapter in Wounded Angels called "The Lonely Boy," because I didn't have friends, and so I had a room full of toys and games because we had I got Christmas presents and whatnot. I had material stuff, but I had like a stack of board games in the closet that never got played because I didn't have any friends to play with. So that was my situation, and it kind of sucked, but yeah. That's why I do
Sure.
inner child work now to reconnect with that.
Wow. Thanks for sharing that, David. And even though, like I said earlier, before we click record, I'd find some of this story moving, which I do. And what you said there, I'm looking forward to reading your book. There's things I say, especially with guys in sessions where males are in such a vulnerable position, and they could be holding on to their relationships, their jobs, I mean, their addictions, and what I've really found is what I say to them, that they've got this massive element of fear, and they're scared and they're lonely. And do you know what? It still hits me to this day, where when I see a male client of mine who's completely lost, and I always say to them, It's interesting what you were saying about your book." I said, sometimes we go into that vulnerable child mode where we're massively vulnerable. We're just seeking somebody to sit there with us. We're not expecting a miracle, but it can be so lonely and scary as well. And most importantly, is what I say to guys, we don't like compliments. I've noticed in therapy, 100%, guys are terrible for it. But when they start recognizing their progression and their own personal growth and what they're becoming and how they're achieving, you can see they're partly proud of it. But as a male and the therapist sat on the other side, sometimes I can find it quite difficult, because all we can do is be there for them in those dark times. So when you do see a guy who's quite emotional in therapy and vulnerable, if I could take away their pain, David, I'd jump in front of them. you know,
Yeah.
but unfortunately I can't. I can only sit with them, guide them the best I can. So again, another conversation outside of here. Sorry, I'm kind of waffling there, but you're making some really valid points of different things here. So with what you had, being kind of like the lonely child, if you like. I mean, what started making David curious? What did he love? What could completely absorb David's attention, if you like?
Sorry, the door just slammed. I would love to answer that question, but I'd also really like to address what you just said first,
Mm,
because I love when you talked about that wanting to take away people's pain. It's so human, and so, but in a way, it's addressing our own discomfort, right? Sometimes, and my daughter, who is a wonderful young woman, very wise. She's 22 years old. We were traveling through Thailand, and it was quite stressful. We had a couple of situations with just some stressful situations, and she was having a bad night, and she was upset, she was crying, and I was trying to figure out how to help her, how to make her okay, make her happy. And she said to me, "Am I allowed to be upset, Dad?" And I was floored. I was like, "Yeah, you are." I wasn't comfortable with her emotional discomfort, right? And I wanted to make it go away, right? But, you said sitting with people. Oh my God, that's what we do. And the other thing is when we sit with ourselves, that's when the healing starts. And that's what I started to do. Before I could do that, I couldn't do anything, but I didn't want to sit with myself. I didn't like myself.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
I mean, anyway, that's just, I wanted to touch on that because it's such a key point.
No,
And
that's
yeah,
brilliant. Like what you said there, I can really relate to it myself. And because I can really feel my clients when they're in that stuck, vulnerable place, and you've got experience of that in regards to being that vulnerable person, and we're scared. We've got that fear. Let's be honest, when we look at our past addictions, what did we do? We knew it was there. So what do we do? If we suppress it with what we're taking and just avoid it for a few years. I know I done it for God 15 years. I knew it was there. But at the same time, when you start becoming clean, and it's scary. Like you said, going into that vulnerable child mode. And I didn't know, could I express this? Could I let people know I'm scared? Could I let people know
yeah,
that I'm struggling? Could I let people
yeah,
know I'm frightened? And as you know, as a guy, we kind of put this mask on, think, yeah, I'm okay. And we keep going. And I always say to different guys who I've worked with where, and you can see them holding it in sometimes, David. And I work with guys who have been scaffolders, builders, multimillionaires, various types of amazing guys, but you can really see the ones who are proper men's men. You can see them holding it in and they're fighting it. And eventually when they release it, they kind of look at me and they apologize. And I really fear that, as you know, when we're in that vulnerable place, all of us can learn psychology through a textbook, but at the same time, I feel like you have to live some of those lived experiences so you can truly meet your clients with compassion. And like I said earlier, I can use humor sometimes in regards to, especially when it comes to builders, people, got real physical jobs. I do use a little bit of humor and they don't know what to do when they've released to me. And I always say to them, using humor, I said, look, I'm not going to tell you friends, it's between me and you. And they do laugh a bit. And then I said, how do you feel now? And they said, it feels like I've released a bit of pressure, but I don't feel stupid. So for me, I always say to guys, that is a true honor for being that person who's opposite to them. Because as you know yourself, some guys don't ever open up, David. They keep going. You can feel the pressure. And like what you said, we either go into that vulnerable position or go to that sitting in our own shadow to find the answers we seek, which is scary, or do we walk around like a ticking time bomb? And us as males, our normal response is if we're in fear or danger, what do? We respond with anger and aggression because that's how we defend ourselves. So doing the complete opposite and going into the vulnerable child mode is such a hard thing for any of us to do. And I'm not sure about yourself. I have regular supervision. I see a therapist myself. And when life does take its toll on me, I will go into that vulnerable mode. I always apologize to my therapist, Jenny, who's an amazing therapist, very person centered. And if there's tough stuff going on, I always apologize and laugh before the session. I said, there's probably going to be some tears, maybe, Jennifer. So I'm more open with that now. And I think that's partly the training I've done, the support I've had. So I am more open. But yeah, you made such a valid point, and it's very interesting that your daughter's asking you that can I show these emotions? That's
hmm
really interesting, isn't it? How we're kind of programmed into what we should and shouldn't do with our own feelings. So
yeah.
I can only
No, mind
I could
blowing. Yeah,
I can only imagine how difficult that was for a dad sitting there with his daughter full well knowing, well, I can't fix you.
it was. I
All
wanted her to be okay. Yeah, exactly.
mm,
But it's like that's just it. Is it okay to not be okay?
yeah.
And
Sure,
that's a
and
huge one.
that's yeah.
Yeah.
I can imagine that gave you such a. I haven't got children myself, so I can only imagine what it's like having that tie and wanting to save people. I'm terrible with my clients. It's like I say to them, if I could take away your pain, I would. I'm kind of used to it, but when it's somebody attached to you so much like a daughter, I can only imagine what it's like for you guys to go through that. It's just. Yeah, I can only, reflect on what it could possibly be like. So I'm really glad, obviously, she's had a decent dad to give her some guidance and sit there with her and kind of help her evolve into her own person. So that's really interesting. We could speak for hours, David, I think. So so kind of what kind of started making you curious, what kind of, again, obviously we've gone through the childhood side, becoming an adult. I mean, what kind of started making you curious? Because we scraped the surface a little bit of addictions
Yeah.
in the past and everything. What
Mm.
was kind of going on for you there, and what started making you become curious, or that slight breakthrough you started making from that typical, addiction habits and routines that we have?
Yeah.
What kind of completely kind of started to absorb your attention through that?
The good side. Yeah. Music for the most part. As we talked about this a little before we started the camera rolling, but I played drums professionally. I played. That's what brought me to Japan in the first place. Actually, I did a whole bunch of amazing coaching clinics in Indonesia last year with some great kids. It's all over
Wow.
my Instagram if anybody wants to check it out. And yeah, I started with piano and then moved on to drums, and I think that was the first indications like I could be okay. I could be healthy. I could be accepted. Because when I was playing the drums, the first of all, the bullies would back off. Oh, Haskell, he's pretty good with drums, whatever. And I would kind of be connecting with fellow musicians and that kind of thing. So for me, I wasn't able to communicate in a regular way. I was way too broken at the time. And so for me, music made me curious. Music made me feel a part of. And later, writing filled that role as well. When the addiction took music away for a while, as addictions will tend to do, it'll take everything away. So after that, I was just at the bottom, and I started writing as a form of like that I could communicate without actually having to be face to face with you or get up on stage or anything like that. But yeah, those kinds of things I think from the start made me curious about what could be better.
Wow, that's amazing, isn't it? Where you're stuck in that cycle, if you like, and then when you start walking away from the habit and the addiction side of things, and you start finding something where you can kind of relate to, and it sounds like your communication was through music. You wasn't the one who wanted the spotlight. You didn't want to be amongst the crowd, uh, and it's really interesting that that was your way to communicate people with yourself, to, as we know, to slowly build our confidence, because that alone, when we've hit that rock bottom, our self-esteem, our confidence, everything's gone. And having to kind of have that blank canvas again, and find your purpose through music, I find that really powerful there as well. I mean, looking at kind of that journey you started for finding your purpose, we've kind of part through that lonely child mode as well. I mean, what through that part of that journey, because I want to kind of get to some core parts of the difficulties within that. What frightened you through that part? Because obviously going through the addiction side that you did, you started breaking your cycle, you found a little bit of glimmer of light of relating to your music. What in the background was frightening David within that journey?
Um, More than anything, I think failure was frightening. It still does scare me. I'm very much, I have imposter syndrome a lot. I feel that, I won't accomplish what my heart wants me to accomplish, with whatever I'm doing, creative pursuits and whatnot. And, and of course, addiction leads to failure. And so, it becomes the sort of thing where like, I'm in a complete vortex, you're just going down, 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 down. There's nothing you can do to get out of it. And so my worst fears were coming true. And again, this is in the book. I ended up living basically as a hermit for like 11 years. I was 100 pounds heavier than I am now. The music was long gone. I was just living, teaching English occasionally just to make enough money to support my habit and not be on the street. 11 years, and that inner child. Now, again, I do inner child work, right? But I say inner child, but this guy was 30 something to 40 something years old. And it was like, whenever I get triggered, I go back to that, the imposter stuff, the failure stuff. It's like, it's just going to happen again, because I was writing books then and they weren't doing that great. And it's like, well, you're going to be a failure again. You're always a failure. So that was a big, big fear for me. And I am defiant in the face of that fear at this point. I'm like, I'm gonna do some things. I'm just bound and determined at this point. It's like, I don't even care.
good on you. And wow, for 11 years as well, and going around in that continuous cycle just to
It's a
kind of
long time.
keep a habit going, just to kind of live minimally, if you like, well, just to function and kind
I
of,
wasn't I wasn't even function I mean, it was just, it was a very long rock bottom of addiction. I wasn't functioning. It was pathetic. It wasn't good.
it's and people like yourself, you're so hard on yourself, and I hear people say that a lot in regards to saying it was pathetic. And the thing is, you was going through such a tough time,
Mm.
and kind of, let's be honest, trying to keep afloat the best you can with what little you had. And
Yeah, I think maybe I'm using pathetic in a different I don't mean I'm not hard on myself. I've done a lot of work with the inner critic.
good,
I think I mean pathetic in the sense of like a sad story, like a sad situation. Um,
sure.
yeah.
And
I mean,
for
because I literally I was like, I'd never opened the curtains, I never went outside, and I'm an outdoors guy. I was down on the beach this morning riding my bike. I have a, grounding sort of routine and that kind of thing. So
mhm.
that's when I say, just to clarify that, I'm not saying I was pathetic, but the situation was quite sad. It was quite sad.
Sure,
Yeah.
and I can relate to some of that because when as we spoke before the session, when I was in my music career, when everything collapsed, same as yourself, I went into hermit mode. I went from somebody who travelled on their own, quite confident. I'd play at various clubs and be okay. But I think a lot of my cocaine use was suppressing my feelings at that time until I had that loss of one of my friends, and that really broke me at the time. But again, I went into that hermit mode. I moved back in with my parents, and whether you can relate to this or not, I went from someone traveling to being quite confident to somebody even walking 5, 10 minutes up the road to go and get something from the local shop. I panicked. I didn't even know what anxiety was. I
Yes.
didn't know what a panic attack was. And
Yes.
it's like I'd get halfway there and rush back, and I always remember when I used to close that bedroom door, that sense of relief I had, that kind of, oh, this is my world, and no one's there. So yeah, it's a really interesting transformation where some of us go into that hermit mode, and you've done it for so long. So I really admire you learning to kind of break that shell outside of you, and having the, strength and the bravery to be able to step out of that kind of comfort zone we get into. So yeah, I'm just kind of looking at that for 11 years. I know I done it for about a year, and I did keep fighting it the best I could. And, doing the training that I did and the volunteering with the charity sectors with addictions, that it made me anxious, but it was pulling me out of the comfort zone. So I was kind of exploring that as I went along. But you know yourself, it's so easy to get into that cycle where we want to close that door. And once we close that door, our anxiety seems to drop a little bit and we're in our safe zone. So I can only
Exactly. Yeah.
imagine what that was
Yeah.
like for all that time, David. It
Retreating.
blows
And
me away.
part of that, and I'm not sure about you, but I'm definitely an introvert, and I still close that door and breathe a sigh of relief when I'm out there, especially like as I said, I was on stage last year doing a lot of drumming clinics, and it was wonderful. I had an amazing time, but it was draining. And then like I would find I do that. I'll close the bedroom door and just go, and
Yeah,
it's like, but yeah, I think
I
that's
can,
a pretty healthy version of what we were talking about, which was a real retreat, right? When we get into
sure.
that kind of depth of addiction, the world is our enemy
Yeah,
in a
oh,
big way.
100%. And even to this day, I'm smiling here because I do, as you know, with the day job, I work with people with mental health, and I do, my private practice as well in the evenings. And sometimes I do, it's what people have always asked me, how do you decompress? Because you're doing that, you've got your mental health work, you got your private work, you got your podcast. I said, how do you decompress? I said, it's when I'm away from people, and it's nothing personal to anybody. But like you said, it's
Yeah,
finding my grounded time. My time is going out stupid o'clock in the morning when I do get times, which is normally a Saturday, and I go out really early hours just so I can catch the sunrise in. I take my notepad, I write down my ideas, possible messages to put on socials, just to kind
beautiful.
of share what I'm feeling. And when I do that, sometimes I think I'm kind of like a child sometimes, because depending where I park, if I park in a certain spot, because we've got an amazing forest around here called Witchwood Forest, and that's generally the place where I scattered my mum's ashes. And I always go to that place to seek some of my answers. And sometimes when I'm coming back to the car, I don't know, it's like I can feel the energies again, and I'm like, oh, why can't I just go and stay in the woods just for 6 months? So I find that happens to me. I'm like, oh, okay, we're coming back to society. So I still
Actually,
do. Mm,
sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say
no,
I sort of did the 6 month thing last year, and it was interesting because okay, so I was traveling in Southeast Asia all year. And I was very in seclusion, and I was in touch with people by phone, but I liked it. It's funny, I went to this one place called Sukhothai in Thailand. It's the old ancient capital, and I rolled into town. I met a local, and he said, "How long you staying? 1 night, 2 nights?" And I said, "I'm staying for a month." And he said, "You're crazy. It's boring here. You're not gonna like it. You're gonna hate it." I loved it. The birds were chirping every morning. I was writing my books, but I did find my limit because after 6 months, I got quite lonely. And I
sure.
and then Indonesia happened, and I met up with some people and had a very, vibrant experience there. So, I'm not gonna go to the top of the mountain forever, but I'm okay with stepping back for a long time, but it's not always feasible, you know?
Sure, sure. Again, I find that really interesting. Like you say, we do need some form of, connection with people, but just
Eventually.
hearing that
Yep,
alone, I think, I'd love to be able to do that. And again, just experience that side of things. And as you know yourself, when we're in that kind of confined space and loneliness, it can creep in. And then, as you know, we think all sorts. And it's having the courage and the strength to be able to pull ourselves out of that sometimes, which is, again, I don't know about you. I'm always I'm learning every day. I'm not saying I get it right all the time, but sometimes I do need my own space so I can decompress. And it's like, I just can't hear anybody at the moment.
definitely. No doubt.
And it was interesting earlier going back to our conversation. Sorry, I'd speak for hours with you, David. Sorry. That's interesting earlier what we were speaking about. When we kind of sometimes forget, underneath the adult, if you like, there's still that kind of young, vulnerable person, and the child who experienced the world before they had kind of like the language to explain it. And often, we can only understand our younger selves once we become more older. So we look back and think, that's why I reacted that way, and that's why I became so independent, and why I found asking for help so difficult. That's why I needed people to approve of me. So, did do you ever have you ever kind of reached a point in your kind of adult life, David, where you've looked backwards and suddenly understood something about the younger David, if you like?
Yeah, I mean, many times, the inner child work brought that out quite a lot. Again, I mentioned scapegoat at the beginning. Um, just feeling like other people's opinions about me were what I was. Like I was supposed to, I had to agree with that, right? And it's like I look back and I'm like, no, I don't agree with that. And I don't. I hope this teacher never sees this or whatever. But I had a teacher, and he was a music teacher, so I liked the class. But he used to say, "Well, David, you're just abrasive. That's why you're not getting along with other kids. You're abrasive, and you should stop being abrasive." Now, why the hell wouldn't an adult tell like a 12-year-old that they're abrasive? That's ridiculous. I'm not an abrasive human being. I never was. I was struggling. I can be abrasive, but guess what? There was a lot of reasons why. I lost my mom, my dad was alcoholic, et cetera, et cetera. The kids weren't liking me. And oh, so did this guy think? I mean, people don't think, but for that kind of. So I went through decades thinking, well, I'm abrasive, right? I believed him, right? And it's like that, so that kind of thing, that conditioning was something I accepted all along the way because I thought everybody knows better than me. People seem to be doing life better than me. They're able to make friends. I'm not. I never got the instruction manual. I don't know why, but I better pay attention to these people and try to do what they're telling me about myself because somehow maybe they'll have the key. And then I got into gurus and cults and stuff, trying to follow that path until that didn't work out. And then I learned about codependency and then I started to get well.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And so sorry for the loss you had with your mum and
Thank you.
difficulties with dad. I can only imagine, again, I had a very similar background to yourself there. And yeah, it's quite hard when we kind of seek, externally to, try and find this golden key for those answers. And when somebody like your music teacher telling you that at such a young age, I'm not surprised that's hit you and was kind of drilled into you that this is who you are. And there's kind of like another thing I'm kind of interested in there in the lives we're expected to live, versus the life we actually end up living, if you like. So when you're young, people often have ideas about who you're going to become, family, teachers, society, and friends. And sometimes we internalize those expectations so deeply that we stop kind of asking ourselves what we actually want. And uh, was there a moment where you realized that perhaps I'm not going to become the person everyone expected me to become?
Pretty recently, maybe, and I have, uh, I'm still trying to understand myself, between fiction writing, nonfiction writing, healing work, music, all that kind of stuff. It's like, is there something I'm supposed to be doing? And it kind of feels like some things come easier than others, or like the universe kind of pushes me in one direction when I feel like I want to go in another direction. So I'm still trying to figure that all out. But as far as like, um, I think just giving the world the opportunity to see me, and either like me or not, but I'm okay with myself. That's the kind of thing I would have paid lip service to for a long time and maybe say, "Oh yeah, but now I really genuinely feel it." And that's a result of healing. It really is because I really, I had a conversation with somebody and just the other day, and he was kind of mentioning that he had done something that he was apologizing for, and I said, "Well, oh, it's fine. I think you're fine. The next week everything was fine, and we've been hanging out and talking, but I just kind of thought you just didn't care for me. You didn't like me, right? Which is, and some people don't, but it's not. It wasn't accusatory. It was just okay. Well, He's not that into me. So then I sort of like was gravitating towards others until like a week later we were chilling and vibing and I was like, okay, he does, and that sort of thing would have thrown me into a spiral for weeks before because like, you can't not like me. You have to explain yourself. That's not fair. I need friends. I need allies. It's not fair that nobody likes me,
Yeah,
but the fact
sure.
is I didn't like myself either. And that makes things, a million times more difficult.
God, it's really deep and kind of at the same time learning to kind of step across your barriers of fear there, where before you'd kind of reflect on why don't these people like me, etc. And you kind of learn to kind of do opposite action. And as we know that taking that step can be scary, can be frightening. And I can so relate to what you're saying there, especially new people I've met through the podcast. I've met some amazing, wonderful people. But again, we still have that like kind of inner child is, am I safe? Can I trust this person? Can I? There's all these things we go around and we make these kind of interpretations, as in our mind that we're having this automatic thought that I'm a terrible person because of what we've been through in the past. And the thing is now, like you, David, I always say to people, just because I've got the qualifications and the training, it doesn't mean I'm up here and I know everything. I'm learning every day. But now I find myself similar to yourself, where it's like, we have those thoughts, we have that anxiety build, and now I'm kind of like, right, we've been there, done it, got the t-shirt, turn around and face it, jump and see how you get on, and that's kind of how I tend to deal with things nowadays. So that's really interesting. You're on that kind of similar path, if you like, and would you say in that moment, that kind of transition, that change which you was having there, was that kind of frightening, or would you say that was a bit liberating because of what you've kind of accomplished within that moment, if you like?
Um, which part are you talking about?
In regards to the friendships, engaging with somebody and going back into our old ways of thinking, I'm not good enough, etc.
Yeah,
And because
it
you've
was
done the
scary.
opposite to that,
It was scary as hell. I mean, for a long time. I've been at it for coming up on 8 years since I was finally able to quit the drugs and alcohol. And that was just the start of healing, right? Because if you're in a substance addiction situation, nothing's going on. It's only gonna get worse, right?
sure.
And so it's been, coming up on 8 years of that. maybe about 5 years of the codependence work too, and the inner child work. So it was very scary because I was struggling. I didn't know what was going on. I was new. I was, trying to survive and keep my job and not go back to the old ways. And meanwhile, I was, in relationships which I now know, I now see. Okay, so here's the thing. You can say what you want. People have different opinions about this, but I believe there is no such thing as a one-way codependent relationship. I think we do our dance, right? If you have one person being volatile and angry and you say, "Oh, what's wrong with that guy?" Nobody takes that guy seriously, but it's like, what's going on the other side? What are the microaggressions or the little comments or the whatever? And it's not, nobody's doing this stuff on purpose, right? But the thing is, if a healthy person encounters an unhealthy person, I believe what ends up happening is the healthy person just sort of backs away. They feel the unhealthiness, they put up the boundaries. If you're helping someone or if you're a therapist, that's a bit of a different story, right? Then you've got a situation where, okay, it's acknowledged that I'm gonna help you from a healthier position. That's a little bit of a different dynamic, but generally speaking,
Sure.
it's like it's water seeks its own level, and these people, people that I thought was that I was, stressing or bothering, and they are really great, and I was really a piece of crap. It turned out as I look back at those that we were all doing our little unhealthy dance and like trying to resolve things that have been like eating at us for decades.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's really interesting what you're saying. I can so relate to some dynamics of my own journey there, and what you said, a key part there is boundaries. I mean, I'm so boundary based with my work. I have to be. Uh, I'm not saying I don't feel things. There's a few times when I finish the sessions and I've needed a decompress because, as I'm sure there's some tough battles with some of these people are having, but I can really relate. And I think because I'm not saying I get it perfect, but I can sometimes get to the point when I finish my day job, I switch off, I have a bit of time to myself, then I'm switching back on with therapy. But at the same time, when it comes to kind of like my personal life, and I've always said to people, don't take my boundaries personally, because I used to be that person, probably similar to yourself, where I was kind of more of that people pleaser. I don't want to be left into where I was before. So I had to keep this mask on and kind of seek this approval through people. But now, for me, I recognize that was unhealthy for me. I'm not saying my journey is the right way or the wrong way. I'm on a journey like every one of us. But at the same time, I think some people can take it quite personally when I put my boundaries in place. But the harsh realities are is that I'm putting my needs and wants first, and sometimes I have to. And it's interesting how some people interpretate that. But like you, David, I step back more now. I'm kind of not sat there trying to figure out why they're responding, why they're being the way they do. I mean, come on, I do this in my day job. I don't want to be doing so much in my personal life, because if I was doing this 24 hours a day, I'd burn out quite quickly. So again, with my martial arts in the background, I mean, going out for my hiking, my Reiki, I have to ground myself in some way, because, as you know, the energies we pull in from people, it's draining sometimes. And I always say to people, don't take it personally that I'm setting healthy boundaries in place. But sometimes we have to put our needs first before others, because if we don't, who will? So you've made a really valid point there. And kind of what I'm looking at is kind of identity is kind of something that kind of comes through quite strongly in your work. And I've always found kind of identity kind of fascinating, if you like, because where does identity actually begin? Is identity who we are, or is like an identity partly who we've been told we're supposed to be? Because as children,
Mhm.
we're constantly receiving messages of, you're clever, you're difficult, you're sensitive, you're strong, you're too emotional, and some of those external voices become kind of internal voices, sorry. So we don't even realize we're carrying them. So did you ever reach a point where you thought, you covered some of this earlier on. Some of the things that I believe about myself weren't actually mine. Like, for example, the teacher which told you who you was at that time. So
Yeah.
some of the things I kind of believe about myself aren't actually mine, because obviously you got that more awareness now.
Yeah. I mean, so much of me wasn't me. So much of me was what, caregivers told me I was, and their own beliefs too. It's generational. I have wicked financial insecurities, largely from my grandmother, who grew up in the Great Depression of the 1930s, and had this idea that, like, that we were going to be, on the street destitute tomorrow. So be careful. So I grew up thinking that I was really in, better, save every penny, and I ended up being really stingy with myself. Like, I wouldn't even, buy myself a water if I was thirsty, because you can't spend money, don't waste money. It's funny, I was talking to somebody about that, I used the word waste money, about air conditioning. It's hot here in Japan, right? And she said, "It's not wasting money, you're utilizing the air conditioning, you're taking care of your comfort. That's not wasting." Right? And so, these kind of beliefs I've kind of I think we gravitate towards the people that sort of reinforce these things too, because my ex-wife was very much like that, and I was like, I better pay attention to her because, I'm circling the drain here money wise. I'm not doing well. I'm not good at it. I'm this and that, whatever. You know, in the end, most of that wasn't me at all. And I've done a lot of internal work to try to figure out, what do I think about money, success, um, reputation, these kinds of excellence, all these kinds of things. It's
Sure.
important to find your own integrity and your own sense of those things. Yeah.
Yeah, you're one step ahead of me in some of my questions here because I was going to ask in regards to how difficult has it been so far to separate your own voice from kind of like the voices you absorb from other people. So you're
Yeah.
on that huge transition at the moment, I hear. I mean,
Yeah.
how
Inner child work has been the key for that. And it's interesting too, because I use a really pretty simple technique where you just vocalize the, whatever's going on, but you do it in the third person. So if somebody rejects me, I say, I'm angry, my heart's pounding, I want to punch a wall, I can't believe they rejected me. And then I turn it to the second person and say, "Who are you?" Right? And try to approach this, whatever the root inner child is. And a couple of times it wasn't me at all. It was like my dad, or it was my grandmother, or it was like a blank, it was like society. It was like, it wasn't even a belief that even went all the way back to when I could remember my first thoughts. It was something that was imprinted on me. And, we're human. We tend to get to have that happen. And so that was really amazing. I'm like, oh, that's not me at all. Wow. That's my
mm,
dad talking. That was it.
yeah,
Literally this thing that I'd been repeating for, towards myself and others, was the words and beliefs of my father.
yeah. Wow. So you're making me reflect on so much stuff here as well, David. Again, what I've had drilled into me from I never met my biological father, but my stepdad, who I was brought up with for all the years that I would. He was a man's man. I won't go into too much things, but he could look after himself physically, if you like. And he always taught me is don't show me your tears if they give you crap. And this is what he generally said to me: if they give you crap, punch them in the mouth. And that's what my upbringing was. There was some element of violence there, and seeing that as a child in regards to how my stepdad was, that's kind of, even though I didn't like it, because when I went down my martial arts route, I had a lot of my friends in the past who were pumped up on steroids. They had cocaine issues as well. And they
Mhm.
always said to me that, oh, if you pumped up on steroids, you'll be this, you'll be that. And looking back at what I was brought up with, is what I explained to him. If I went down that route, I'd quite really damage somebody, and that scared me. So I was having that transition of pulling away where I was more emotional and open. But with my
Mhm.
stepdad, it was like, well, you solve your problems with your fists. So I was having
Right.
that tug of war where if any confrontations happened and I could look after my own, it frightened the hell out of me, David, and it made me feel really emotional because I didn't like fighting. I didn't like being confrontational. I use all what I'm trained in to defend myself if I ever need it. But at the same time, like what you said, if I've been in difficult scenarios, especially working with homelessness and that sector, which I've done over the years, and we've had people confrontational, I am there to defend myself. But in
Yeah.
my head, not saying I ever respond, but in my head, it's like, I feel my dad going through it. I feel it in me. And it's like,
Yeah.
this is how you respond. I obviously don't react, but it's so interesting that we can still kind of have that in the background of how we should respond in a particular situation. So you made a really valid point there. What I love about my guests on the show, I normally have an hour or two afterwards really reflecting. So thank you so much for that. And I see kind of something similar quite often, through my counselling work. People spend decades kind of performing versions of themselves, So we have the strong one, we have the successful one, the provider, the funny one, or the
Sure.
reliable one. I mean, the
Yeah.
person who never needs help. That's a classic, that one as well. Or the person that, I hear this so many times, the person who always says to their family members and loved ones is that I'm fine. And eventually they kind of reach a point where they ask themselves, who am I when I'm not performing that role? Which again, we've obviously explored some of that, of that experience of kind of having that performance of people around us, but not discovering our true authentic self. And
Mhm.
kind of what makes, what kind of happens when that mask becomes so familiar, if you like, and, you know, that you don't know who you are underneath. So kind of, if I look at some of the stories here, when did the stories um first become important to you? Because you've been on such a huge journey, and I'm gonna be ordering, once we finish our session, is something I've been meaning to do. I will order one of the books we discussed earlier. And
Awesome.
I'm when did the stories first become important to you? Was there a kind of particular book, a writer, a character, or even story that made you kind of look at the world differently?
Mm. It's funny because I thought for a while it was very separated things like the, entertainment, music stuff and the writing. But it really is very much a continuum for me. But I think part of it was wanting to be heard, understood, respected, admired, these kinds of things that I'd never felt that I got, and needs that I wanted to have met by people that weren't able to give me these kinds of things. Excellence has been a big part of my life. I was a world class drummer in one of the top groups back when I was in high school. And I ended up playing drums at Disneyland and things like that, professional gigs. So I mean, the writing was sort of a natural extension of that. But at the same time, I think too, it's become more than that because it's come to this, and I started writing the nonfiction a lot later, and I didn't want to. I was just like, "Oh, no, I don't wanna do that. Nobody cares about nonfiction. Nobody, I don't wanna be a guru." Again, all that stuff. I don't wanna be telling people how to run their lives, and I don't. But the writing and the fiction too, the sci-fi, has all led to these connections that I've always wanted in my life, and it's been really amazing because for most of my life, I was really struggling to sit down and have a conversation where I felt like, from beginning to end, you wouldn't find some way to dislike me, because that's usually how things went. And so I was trying to find other ways to do it. Get on stage, public, write it, or from behind a desk, these kinds of things, and or get intoxicated because then you can be more personable and these kinds of things. So I think I was always striving for that, but as I say, it's kind of morphing now. I think I'm really having some transitional moments, even now, even in the last couple of months, in terms of what I want, how I want to approach, my life, my career, my relationships, and going forward, and on a very equal basis too. Like, I'm very much into equality. I'm not looking for any kind of. I don't want to be anybody's mentor, and I don't really. And I'm not saying I don't. I learn from everybody, but it's not. I'm not looking for somebody to teach me. I'm a little too old to be going into the mentor program or anything like that. So I'm pretty much just doing what I'm doing, and I'm looking for, connections where we can just vibe off of that. And, I hear your take on things and you hear my take on things and we go from there. And so that's the
Sure.
writing to me is the way that you can get closer to me, whether we have a
Sure.
conversation. Yeah.
Sure, I really appreciate you. You're definitely going to give the listeners a lot of insight there. And from what I hear is obviously it's helping you, kind of your journey so far is helping you understand the world, from your own lens, if you like. And
Yeah.
because I've kind of I've come to see kind of imagination kind of differently sometimes through therapy, where we sometimes kind of treat imagination of something childish, if you like, or, something we grow out of. But I actually think imagination can be really incredibly important, psychologically. If we think about depression, for example, sometimes someone who's deeply depressed can't imagine tomorrow will be different. Trauma
Mm.
can
Oh yeah.
narrow our senses of possibility. Fear can narrow it. Addiction narrows it. Shame, and but our imagination really opens a door, and it says kind of maybe something else is possible, or maybe there is another way. Maybe this isn't the end of the story. And do you think that's one of the reasons stories can kind of matter so much, if you like?
Oh yeah. Definitely. Um, a few things. I would say the world right now is a train wreck. I mean, it's really, really disheartening, horrifying, and my
Yeah,
home country in particular, is really distressing. I've literally, and it's no joke when I tell friends back home, I'm in Japan. Hey, maybe I'll come home, and they say, "Don't stay in Japan." And it's like, okay, and Japan, sadly, is starting to go that direction too.
yeah,
And so, right now we're in one of the, this is history, right? It's a roller coaster, there's ups and downs, and we're in a pretty dark time, I think. And so, yeah, for me, the nonfiction, the healing stuff is like, let's go on. This is how I healed. This is what it feels like, talk to me or check out my book, and then maybe you can heal too in your own way. That's the past stuff that I write. But then the future stuff is more like, okay, after we're all healed and feeling better, what can we envision that's a little bit better than what's going on now? Because like, it's funny that the short stories I write are pretty dark. Like I write on Substack, I write short fiction, and my short stuff, which is usually like modern day, is pretty dark. But all my sci-fi stuff, my novels are pretty visionary and pretty like, hey, yeah, the future might be good if we can get there, So, yeah, I think imagination is so vital. It's absolutely vital. And one word that you mentioned, and I'm not to call you out, but I used to say the word childish and sometimes immature as well. I have thrown those out of my vocabulary. The word I use is childlike. And I've learned to embrace when I'm feeling childlike because, we all do at times,
of
and
course.
particularly when we get stressed. And when I'm doing the inner child connections, I think, oh, I'm being childlike, and that's fine, but also being aware of it. Cause like if I'm being childlike in a way that's like, not enhancing the vibe, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Cause like
sure,
I'm tired, I'm stressed, I'm an introvert and I can't go shut my door just yet. These kinds of
sure.
things that used to just blow me up, and with addiction, that's what we tend to do. We go really extreme with that stuff. But now, yeah, the childlike behavior, the childlike imagination is something I love about myself. And if, you talked about manly men and that kind of stuff, and some guys might be like, "Oh, don't be like that." I don't care about their opinions.
Good on you.
Do you know what I mean? I'm not out to tell anybody what to do, but if you tell me that I shouldn't be a certain way, I'm probably not gonna be into that anymore.
Sure. And again, I'm always kind of different times when it comes into like the child set mind. I have at different times where I have this burst of energy and I'm excited and I get creating with some of my music productions and I go into that kind of fantasy world child state and I embrace that. I love that. And what you were saying there, like because you as you know, we're always a yeah, ongoing project. We're always learning. We're evolving one way, one way or the other. And sometimes when we, kind of learn to step across that barrier of fear, we really do start finding answers. And what was really interesting, what you said there, is becoming aware of what states you can be in, and it can be really powerful. And like you said, with addictions, normally if we can look at things extremely or we used to block them out, we used to avoid, but now we're sitting with it and exploring that more. This is what I love about like the therapy side of things and the inner child. I find it absolutely fascinating when we recognize that and we start growing from it instead of kind of punishing ourselves to who we are. And I love the fact is that you're kind of like, I am who I am. If you accept me, great. If you don't, I will move forward. And I find that such an amazing place to be. And particular people can interpret that, take it personally in that side. But as well as me, David, it's hard to kind of get to where we are. And I'm not saying I'm up here and everything's perfect. I wobble 100%. I wobble, but I've learned to kind of pull it back on track. And again, what another thing you said earlier, it all depends what the universe throws at me. You know, we're going down this direction, and you kind of look up, you're like, oh, thanks for that. I really need this at the moment. So my headspace is very similar to yours there. And
Mm.
was there and was there kind of fear attached to becoming kind of vulnerable through your writing, if you like? Because when you put something kind of personal onto a page, you're allowing strangers into part of your life. And what I admire about you, David, is that you went down the girl route, if you like. And I myself, you know, I found that interesting, but I started to discover my own way, my own coping mechanisms which work for me. And like you, I'm not here to dictate to anybody to say, oh, my way is the right way. You must go by that. I always say to people that, okay, these people have wonderful ideas, but that's still their journey. We have our own. So I find it amazing that you got to that stage that, you know, I've worked hard to where I am. You accept me or you don't. And one way or another, I will go forward through this. So, you know, was there that kind of fear, what I said earlier, in becoming vulnerable for you, writing? Like you said, you're putting personal stuff to a page here, and you're allowing strangers to be in part of yourself. Was there some fear attached to that, to within your writings?
Terrifying. It's terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. And the thing is, yeah, we do live in a world with others. And the thing is to well, one thing is this. If I'm being myself and you tell me, "Hey, David, you upset me," or like you said something that bothered me, I'm gonna listen. And I'm not the kind of, hey, I'm just being who I am and I don't care what you think. It's not like it's, we are, interacting and that kind of thing. So I've heard people kind of push that off and like, it's your problem if you're angry with me or whatever. No, if I did something that upset somebody, I want to have a conversation. Now I need to decide at that point, do I agree with you that I did something wrong? Or, maybe it is you're being, but I'm definitely going to hear you out and have a healing conversation as best I can. And so that's like, that's face to face, person to person. But when you talk about putting everything out there in a published book, I mean, the book kind of wrote itself. It only took about 6 weeks or so, but it took 6 months to decide to publish it because it is literally a vulnerability manual. If you wanted to gaslight me and mess with me, just read my book. You'll know exactly where my triggers are, right? And why, and it was like, why do that? The inner child was like, why would we do that? There's no reason. It's not, because people ask me, was it cathartic? Was it helpful? And it wasn't really. I had already been doing the work for years. I wrote it. I feel I was kind of inspired to write it because it's worth reading. And I've been doing the second edition and doing the audio book, right? And I'm just like, yeah, this is really worth reading. It needed to be out there. And so I'm taking a risk. And the internet is a cesspool. People, there's real danger. People who say, "Hey, get over your fear, just do it." People have legitimate reasons for caution. And we're out here. There's going to be hate. There's going to be trolls and all that kind of stuff. So, of course, I was terrified.
Sure. That's again, there's so many guests I have here, which kind of get me to really reflect on what I'm going to, because I genuinely would love to write a book. You know, different people said to me over the years, you've got so much to it. And even now I feel anxious about it now. And uh, it's kind of like what you said is putting your personal stuff out there. And like I said, David, what I admire about you, you're not expecting people to say, read this book and go by my way. These are the set rules. You know, you're very open in regards to this is my journey and take from it what you need. And I find that really, you know, doing what you've done, I so admire you, because I'm grinning here. Like I said to you, if my anxiety comes, I grin or I giggle. It's there, and I'm like, oh, this guy's took the leap of faith. I'd love to be able to do that, and that's a real difficult thing to do, because everyone says they value authenticity until somebody, let's be honest, actually becomes authentic. We're often much more comfortable with polished stories, if you like. You know, I
Yes.
struggled, I overcame it, everything worked out. but real life isn't usually that neat, unfortunately. And healing can be messy, as you know. Recovery certainly can be messy. And
Mhm.
sometimes you're doing brilliantly, and then sometimes something happens, and suddenly you're struggling again. And do you think there's kind of too much pressure on people to present kind of recovery as such a straight line, if you like?
Definitely, and I don't like it. I see there's some, and again, here I am, my competitors are destroying me in business because there's a lot of quick fix stuff out there. There's a lot of, let it go and you'll be fine. There's a lot of toxic positivity. And so I learned about toxic positivity from a dying woman, a friend of mine. She passed away. She had cancer in her mid 40s, two teenage kids, and she explained to me what toxic positivity feels like and how destructive it can be. And she was like, "I'm not going to get my happy ending. I'm going to die in a year or two, and I'm not happy about it either." She wasn't making peace. She was, she was okay, but not happy, and she felt, cheated. And I didn't blame her. But anyway, um, where was I going with that? I just went way off track because I just wanted, the toxic positivity. That's, you see a lot of that.
Yeah.
And
Mm.
so, and the other part of that is the quick fix stuff. Like, here's the 10, 10 list of 10 things, and then you'll be okay. I feel that if I was doing that kind of thing, I would be seeing more success. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like
Hmm.
everything, the internet's really flooded with that. And it feels good. It feels good to think, oh, maybe that's my solution. But the fact is, the work takes a long time and it's painful. That's what's gonna, that's what's hurting me, is telling that truth, right? Because, like, nobody wants to hear that, and I didn't wanna hear it either. Like, when I hit rock bottom with the codependency, somebody told me, "You will maybe start feeling better in a year," and I wanted to kill that person, but they were actually right, you know? It's a process. We didn't get to where we were in a minute, and we don't get out of it in a minute. I don't say, there are some people that just, like, they had this, like, experience and they just transformed. I don't say that they're liars. It's just not my experience. I wish,
Yeah.
I kind of wish
Sure.
it was my experience, but it wasn't my experience. And I tried to follow the type of people that were telling me that that would happen to me too, as well,
Mm.
because it sounds great. And I just can't go down that road. So
Yeah, thanks again for sharing that. And again, sorry, in regards to your friend passing,
oh,
and
thank you. Yeah.
obviously giving you hell of a lot of insight. As I know, when we spoke earlier, I have been brought up around a lot of grief, and I've had some really interesting wisdom chucked at me towards those end of days. And like you said, this positivity, the toxic positivity which goes out there. Again, I'm not going to go into the whole hate towards this side of things, so I don't want it to absorb my energy. But I've heard so many people are saying about anxiety and depression. And, I'm an anxiety care pre therapist. I'm not saying I'm the top expert of the world. I'm learning every day. But I've had somebody tell me that I can fix your anxiety, I can fix your depression, I can fix your addiction. And for me as a therapist and with yourself, like I said, I'm not saying I know any more than you. I've got slightly different views of yourself, but we've been on a similar journey. And where you're authentic and real, some
Mhm.
people can't cope with that. And I so relate. I've heard these people saying, I beat my addiction, I beat my homeless, now I'm a number one author. And I'm like, yeah, if I could do that, that would get rid of quite a lot of my headaches. But for
Sure.
me, this journey is ongoing. It is all maintaining. We're going to slip up. We're going to kind of possibly go back to old ways sometimes. But I'm a firm believer going through these real tough challenges, you start becoming authentic and real, and you start meeting a lot of things with compassion. And this is what I tend to do now. But then I've always found, especially with social media, you get, no offense to the guys, I'm just going to say how it is here, but you get a lot of guys who've gone through similar to what I did, say back in 2010, what we discussed. And then
Mhm.
all of a sudden, I dragged myself through that because I did. And I always remember, it's a tiny story here. I always remember when I just beat my cocaine habit. I didn't have any cravings, nothing. I mean, after 15 years, as you know, that's a hard pattern to break. But I was quite fortunate that I didn't need it anymore. But in my head, because I didn't take antidepressants, because I didn't go back to my addiction, and because I lost a lot of my friends and through overdoses, in my head at that time, I was like, I want to go and save everyone because I've beat it. my approach of what I've done is the right way for everybody. And I always remember a therapist, Nick, his name was, and I always remember him. He took me aside one day, and I was only 6 months into volunteering at the time. I just literally registered to be accepted to do my level 2 counseling training. So I was at the complete start of my recovery. And I remember him taking me aside, and he said to me, he goes, I can imagine you're going to be good at what you do. But one thing you need to remember, learn to help you before you help others, Garen. He goes,
Oh yeah.
and I'm not going to lie, I found it quite offensive because I thought it was a personal attack on me. So my mind at that time was like, yeah, but I beat my cocaine problem. I've lost a lot of friends through either overdoses or suicide. So I must be able to do this. Somebody's got to listen to who I am. And at the time, I found it really personal and it annoyed me. But then when I thought about it and reflected back, I went back, and he was a trained therapist at the local college where I lived. Massive experience. And I went back to him. I said, "Thank you for telling me that." And he said, "How do you mean?" He goes, "Did you take it personally?" I said, "At first I did." But I said, "What you said was real." I said, "The real part of it when it comes to addictions and the helping sector, I'm not gonna lie, I cannot save everyone, unfortunately. That's not how it works." But how
Yeah.
I made that transformation then, and it was like, well, hang on a minute, you know, just because you got through it in your way, it isn't necessarily true that every single person's done the same. Everyone's different. And that for me was a big transformation. And like what you said, at that particular time, I found that really personal, Dave, and I didn't like it. But now I've come to terms, if somebody wants to be open, authentic, I'd love to have more conversations with you because you're real, open, and honest. And it's not attacking anybody on that. But if there's something we didn't quite agree with, we'd sit and have a discussion with an open discussion where some people close it down, they avoid, they block it all out, and they don't want to have that conversation. And it's like, well, that's where you go back and learn a little bit more. Where I feel myself and you could have quite an open conversation. I can imagine it'd be quite fascinating, like the podcast is, and I find that really interesting about you there as well. And kind of, again, I admire you've done your books. I've admire you can relate to that positive toxicity which goes on, and when I hear it, I can't watch too much of it because I'm like, God, if only my journey was that easy. I'd have less grey hair and wrinkles, David. I don't know about you. Life would have
Yeah, me
been a
too, me
little
too.
bit more easier
And I
for me.
yeah, and I'm a big advocate of positivity, and, I do affirmations, all those kinds of things. I was so embittered by the time I was, at the bottom. I just hated everything, and doing, gratitude lists and these kinds of things was very helpful.
Yeah,
And it's just not the false stuff. It's like you can find something to be grateful for that's real, like, it's a pretty nice day, or like the beach looks pretty, that kind of thing. You don't have to make things up or say like, um I'm grateful I only have stage 2 cancer. It's like, no, that's toxic positivity. That's something you're contending with. And
sure,
so, maybe somebody could throw that back at me and say, "Hey, I have stage 2 cancer and you're full of shit." They might say that. But for me, yeah, it's like that the reality of what's going on and what has gone on is important. And also the reality that it's not gonna be an easy road back. And some people don't even make it, which is
sure.
another fact. Yeah.
Sure. And I mean, again, because I feel comfortable of opening this with you. So we're talking about the positivity side, as everybody's got their own view and opinion, what works for them. If people follow that, that's great. And, they're finding their own answers there. So again, let's kind of talk about failure, if you like. Our culture loves success stories. We love a finished project and the person who made it, the person who recovered and, the
Mhm.
person who built their business and wrote their book. But we don't always want to hear about what came before, the mistakes, the uncertainty, the blooming breakdowns, the years when somebody didn't know whether, they were going to be okay. Why has kind of failure become such an important theme, like in your writing and where you're going with your journey now?
Hmm. I'm not sure. It definitely yeah, I mean, I've been rethinking this stuff a lot too. I don't know. Well, there's different kinds of failure, first of all,
Hmm.
right? Like you look at, okay, in terms of going from no friends to friends is a big success story, right? But was I a failure because I didn't have friends for a long time? Or was I, traumatized and unwell, and sick and that kind of thing? Would you say that a hospital stay is a failure? In other words, so when you're talking about emotional or spiritual or mental unwellness, you could say, "Oh, you were a real failure because you were, mentally unwell and you didn't have any friends. That what a failure you were in your 30s." And was I a failure? I don't know. But it's an interesting thing to think about because, like, I could say, "Hey, I'm a great success story now. I've got plenty of friends." I can say that very confidently, and it's nice to say because it's still fairly recent for me. But then you see, like, failure in terms of business, I mean, I've definitely been on a roller coaster and I've definitely, I've had setbacks, and I've tried different things. I'm not a multimillionaire at this moment. So, but then, I mean, it's one thing I'm thinking back to part of the conversation talking about the guru who like did everything right and now they're a bestseller. And that sounded to me when you said it, I thought to myself, well, that sounds like somebody who's bragging about their material success. And you
Yeah.
see a lot of that, and I want material success too, don't get me wrong, I'm not gonna join, any kind of, a monastery anytime soon. I want the good things in life, I wanna this and that, um, but it's interesting what we consider, that what is failure, what is success, and so I never really thought until this moment, is my life up to this point a failure or a success? It's really interesting, I'm not gonna answer that either. I don't know. Well, it remains to be seen. I really think we can't really know until we're on our deathbed, because
Sure.
I think of the things that were really horrible. I've done harm in my life. Been an addict. I've been, unwell, especially to my daughter, who I love very much, and she grew up with an alcoholic dad, and I did too, so I know how that feels, right? But and not to say that I would have not taken that I would love to have taken that back, but having been there, hitting rock bottom, finding a way to start to recover and starting to repair that relationship, and she also worked hard to repair that relationship. I have a beautiful relationship with my 22-year-old daughter these days that I wouldn't trade for $1 billion. I think I'm not even joking. You know what I mean? And it's like, well, maybe all the bad stuff was just leading somewhere. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, but again, I caution toxic positivity on that because some people don't make it. That's the thing. I know people who've died, and so do you.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's a monster. People can get really, really sick and really, really in a bad place. And I was, and you were too. And I'm out to offer hope to people that are struggling and really do want to try to make a go of it because it is
Yeah.
possible.
Excellent. I love that. And really well done to you in regards to turning it around and being how to build that relationship between you and your daughter. I find that really quite empowering and kind of warm, if you like, David. So I'm showing some of my male emotions here. I'm brave to do it. So I'm smiling here because I find that so inspiring to be able to do that. And that's one of the purposes of the podcast. Like I said, I'm not here to say, here's your 10 steps to how you get life perfect, but sharing that story, what you've done right there is kind of giving prime example of, you know, some of the things you've had to go through. I don't mean it that we go through these stages and we're fading. Sometimes we look for the kind of more, how can I put it, the longer way around, if you like, and we do start finding our own answers. And something I've kind of noticed through my therapy work, people rarely come into a room because everything's going brilliantly, and they, usually come to, relationships are broken down, confidence, their identity, and even their sense of purpose, if you like. And often they're not only dealing with what happened, they're dealing with what they've decided it means about them. So, I've failed, I'm useless, I'm broken, I'm not enough, I'll always be like this. And sometimes the event itself is not only the thing causing the pain, it's the meaning we've attached to that. And do you think the story we tell ourselves about, again, I don't want it to be that it's failure, if you like, but telling the story about ourselves for our difficulties can sometimes be more damaging than kind of like not succeeding in itself.
God, yeah. I mean, definitely. I mean, like 90% of my problems are up here, maybe 98%, and it's rumination, these kinds of things, future tripping. I talk to people about that, friends. I have a good circle of friends that I can really talk to, and it's really important, I think, to be voicing this stuff because we're not alone. And but I'll tell you, I recently things have really calmed down for me to the point where I can literally tell you things are almost certainly going to be fine tomorrow, next week, and next month. Right? Like things are chill, things are going well, and so of course, what does my brain do? Well, what about next year? You might not be okay a year from now, so we better start worrying about it, right? So, and
Yeah.
that's who knows? An asteroid
Yeah.
could hit the planet tomorrow. The
Sure.
the the example I always think to, and this is a negative example, but the big earthquake. I was here for the nuclear disaster, 9.1 mega quake tsunami thing, right? Japan shut down for a week. And so all the things I was worried about tomorrow, the appointment I had to go to, the work I had to do, everything that I was stressed and thinking about for like March 12th, 2020, whatever 2020, I don't remember the year. March 12th, the March 11th was the earthquake, right? Nothing happened on March 12th. Nothing. Nothing at all. Everything I was worried about didn't happen. Right? So future tripping is and it was kind of a worse situation because we were searching for water and food. So, but the point is, I mean, that could, you could conceivably have that hit on the positive side. I'd win the lottery or whatever. And then it's like, I'm not going to work because I'm going to go to Hawaii.
Yeah.
It's future tripping. We have no idea what's going to happen in the future. And that's only the future. Then you've got the stuff that actually does happen. And for me, the hypervigilance that comes with codependency and trauma is huge. Like I was talking about that friend of mine. It's like I felt, maybe he dislikes me. Well, he was maybe just having a bad day and everything was fine. But I make I do that evaluation, like where do I stand with this person? Where do I stand with this person? That's why I stress out in groups. The bigger the group, I get very, the introvert in me, but also the hypervigilance kicks in. It's
Hmm.
better than it used to be.
Yeah.
It's much better than it used to be. But I mean, that's taken a lot of work. And still, if I could quiet my brain more, I would love to. But, you know,
Sure.
work in
That is
progress.
That's really interesting what you said there as well, and I can relate to that. Is when things are going quite well for ourselves, as you had that odd dip in there, like what you said. Our automatic thoughts kicked in, and looking into, yeah, but what will happen next year, and we
Yep.
still do that to ourselves, if you like. But it's trying to pull yourself back into that here and now, and grounding yourself, and kind of saying, well, but everything's okay at the moment. And what happens tomorrow? If we look at your journey, my journey, we've been through tough times, and unfortunately, some people haven't really had the strength, or I don't know for what I say, the strength or resilience, but being able to get through what we've done to have this conversation today. As you know, some people are not here, unfortunately, and
Oh,
I find it really kind of interesting with what you're saying. How we always have that kind of fear jumps in every so often, but it sounds like you challenge it more, you kind of acknowledge it more, and you work for it, a lot better than before. But we still feel for these things, and that side, we're still human at the end of the day. And I kind of want to just touch the surface a little bit in regards to, kind of bringing us to shame, if you like. And I think there's kind of quite an important distinction between guilt and shame, where guilt says, I did something wrong. Shame says there's something wrong with me, and that second one can become kind of incredibly destructive, because shame tells us to hide, or don't talk, or don't tell anyone, don't ask for help. You know, and don't let anybody see what's really happening, as when we hide behind our barrier, fear, if you like. And did shame ever play kind of like a role in any of your own experiences?
no, all of them. I mean, all of them. I mean, that's Wounded Angels is really based in that. Like, the worst day of my life was age 9. When I had a traumatic event happened, which caused a shame attack, which I didn't understand for 40 years. But at the time, this is what I went through at age 9. And so that's like chapter 1 of the book, and like the journey of like figuring out why that happened. A lot of people don't know what it feels like or what it's all about, but for me, it's really clear. And the other thing about that is I joke that I have a broken shame valve, and it's, again, much better. I did a lot of work on it last year. Um, I tend to feel shame when other people misbehave. When people that I look up to, or, kind of, again, this is a codependency thing, like hero worship or whatever. If they act out of character or they're unkind to somebody, I will feel the flood of shame that you know rightfully belongs to them. So it's like this sort of like broken emotional thing. But I think it was just it was very dysregulated. I was extremely dysregulated physiologically. I was feeling these things, and so I'm very, very aware of them. I hate them. They feel horrible. And of course people want them to go away and try to make them go away, right? But for me, I couldn't. The only solution was to end up sitting with it for a long time and putting the work in to to see all the reasons that this was happening, and it's gotten much better. But yeah, that's shame and guilt. Yeah, guilt, yeah, if you accidentally kick a kid when you're walking down the street because you're not paying attention, you're on your phone, you should feel guilty, right? That's just as, that, and you should make up for it when you do harm. Then you should, do what you can to fix it. Feeling shame, that's a whole different thing. Like, you should be ashamed of yourself because this behavior or that behavior, whatever. It's, yeah, it's shame. You probably know more than I do about this stuff, but I think shame is comes from the caveman days, doesn't it? The whole idea that we'll be outcast. And so shame is a life or death thing, just like
Sure.
panic. And so
Yeah.
yeah, so that's why, but it's the almost the opposite. Panic, we go outwards. Shame, we get really like, don't be visible.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
That's really thanks for that, David. Sorry, I keep finding these questions. I so want to get into your mind because I find it so fascinating, and your awareness is phenomenal. I really, I'm not doing any therapy analysis on you here, but I can really resonate to some of the things you're saying, and where you are in the here and now. I find that really powerful. And like, I'm a really big fan of Carl Jung's work. I'm not, what I say to everybody, look, I'm trained in various types of therapy, but at the end of the day, these are ideas, these are not facts. And some of them work amazingly in an amazing way. And I always say to people, therapy isn't for everybody. And I often think about kind of Carl Jung when I speak about kind of shame and identity, and Jung's idea of the shadow, essentially about those parts of ourselves we don't want to acknowledge. So the angry part, the frightened part, the vulnerable part. And the strange thing is, trying to get rid of those parts don't necessarily make them disappear. And sometimes they can kind of simply go underground, if you like, and they
Yeah.
can come out another way. So through our relationships, our behaviors, our anger, our addiction, our self-sabotage. So have you had to kind of, because it sounds like you've done that already, and just asking you the question in regards to, have you had to kind of confront parts of yourself that you spent years, which again, you've hit a lot of this already on the podcast, but confront a lot of yourself, which you spent years trying to avoid?
Yeah, for sure. The one that I mentioned, the hermit, in the book, I named some of these inner child figures, and the
Brilliant.
hermit is the one, the 11-year recluse. I hated that guy. It's like, oh, he's fat, lazy, lost everything, lost a music job, he's useless, smoking. What's right? I really hated myself, so I hated him, and I found myself triggered, interestingly enough, by similar people. Like, if I met somebody who was maybe struggling and maybe having a little bit of a weight problem and maybe, can't quit smoking, I would find myself really kind of, disliking that person for no good reason. And then I'm like, oh, it's not him I dislike. It's that part of me.
Yeah,
It's like, it's funny because when you find yourself disliking someone, at least for me, there's something about that person that reminds you of you.
it's yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's really, really annoying because it works like a charm for me. It really works like a charm for me, and it's like, it's annoying because it's like, then I realize, well, all my, like, condescending, like, "That guy's not that great," was all bullshit, because it was all my reaction to something that I didn't, a mirror being held up to me, And it's like, and you know what? Then I think about those people, and I think, I should love, first of all, they're lovable, and why not love them? And just like I was lovable and I deserved love that I wasn't getting. And I deserved for somebody to say, "Hey, I see that you're really struggling. That sucks." And like, and so, yeah, yeah, so that guy was one of them. I mean, I used to hate that boy, the 9-year-old who was traumatized and in shame because he was so, like, what's wrong with him? Like, I was really, I think, in a traumatic kind of shock, having this shame attack. I was sitting in class, it was the next day, and I was just felt like that life was hopeless. At age 9, I felt like life was hopeless. I wouldn't get anywhere. I wouldn't get where I want to go. I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I just hated the feeling. And so, so I ended up sort of like demonizing that inner child and thinking, "Oh,
Yeah.
if he'd have been cooler, if he'd have had friends, then maybe I would have been okay." And he had no chance. He was traumatized. That's what it was.
Wow. That's such, again, I can really feel that of being like the helper there, where it's like, God, that 9-year-old child going through all that and so vulnerable and having to survive the best he could through that time. This is what I struggle sometimes with guys' stories in that, because again, you know, I work with males and females, and I don't have any personal preference there, but at the same time, I find it really interesting, and I've discussed this with my supervisor in the past, and it's come up a few times when I see that guy, kind of the 9-year-old David, if you like, where we go from being the adult and holding that shield and mask in front of ourselves, and when we let that down in therapy, for me, I kind of really feel them in that moment, and not saying I've got all the answers, because I haven't. I learn all the time, but I can really feel when we're in that vulnerable, scary moment, and it seems to hit me a bit more with males than what it does with females. And I've had this discussion a few times, with my supervisor. So I just hearing that again, it's kind of moving something in me, hearing, God, if I knew that guy when I was that age, uh, myself at school, I did get bullied in my secondary school for a few years by a bully, and I won't go into too much detail, but let's just say I put him in his place and I was never bullied again. But I wasn't somebody who'd go around fighting all children. I didn't like confrontation, even though I was brought up around it. I didn't like it, and I would have been that kid who would have picked up on David, uh, and I would have been like, trying to make sure he's okay. Or if, and with that mentality at that age, I'd have probably tried to save you, and that's what I was like as a child. Because again, I could be strong. Most people knew who my stepdad was in the area I was, very well known with the police and everything, but people expected me to be like that, where I wasn't. So if I saw the young defensive David, if you like, in that moment, I would have stood up for him for anybody in the school, and I would have fought anybody because of that. So that's kind of how I went through, at that young age. That I remember there was a couple of guys in my maths class, and I'm not the best at maths. I never have been. And there was a young lad there, and at the time he clearly had autism, and some of these guys were saying, really, I'm not going to repeat it on here, but they were saying some really kind of disgusting things to him. And there was two of them, and this guy was so vulnerable. I ended up walking out of class. I got told to leave the classroom. All I can say is that I put both of those guys on their back, and I didn't like it. So when I hear, like you say, bringing something up from childhood, when I hear that and I hear the young David who's in such a tough place, it brings that up for me, because I want to fight for them, if that makes sense. That's really interesting how we kind of have those things trigger ourselves. So, thank you for giving me some insight here, Dave. I really appreciate that. And what I find kind of fascinating, again, going back to some of Young's work in regards to individuation, if you like, and it isn't about becoming perfect, or, it's not becoming, some completely different person, if you like. It's about becoming kind of more conscious of ourselves, including parts we'd rather not see. And sometimes the very part of ourselves we're ashamed of, or contains something that we need to understand. So again, with your addiction side, let's kind of talk about recovery, if you like, because as you know, we're on such a similar level to what advice we see puts out there on social media, and there's so much about recovery and addictions.
Mhm.
So because you've been on that massive journey and you've started to kind of become your authentic self. You're challenging your fears. You're sitting in your own shadow, if you like. So
Mhm.
what now with the awareness you've got around you now? What does recovery mean to you now? Kind of, in this present day. What does recovery mean to David?
It means physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional health. That's what that's what I tend to look at and focus on those 4. Maybe there's more. I don't are there
Mm.
more? Have you ever heard any
Sure.
more? I don't.
Well, I kind of, sometimes it can sound, as I say, sometimes, again, like I always say to people, I've been through addiction myself. I do work with people with addictions. I'm not saying my
Yep,
ways the right way or wrong way. And sometimes kind of we make kind of recovery sound much bigger than it actually is. So sometimes recovery is getting out of bed or answering the phone, going for a walk,
sure.
even
Right,
eating something at
exactly.
times. And the big one, which I used to hold back, and I done it a lot when I started opening up, was allowing yourself to cry because I used to hold all this in for so long, and saying sorry to people, asking for help, doing something small for myself, and then realizing that I survived another day. What we're, where some of our small things that helps me rebuild, and I find it really interesting when a guy's been through similar battles we've had from childhood trauma to addictions. When you help them sit with that and they recognize they've made that change, and another thing I find really interesting, especially with males, is that, I always say to them, look, I've got tools and ideas, I haven't got facts. And hopefully you can make, work these tools in your own way to find your own answers. And when a guy's kind of accomplished or achieved similar to ourselves, they've broke that cycle, they got out of bed, they've gone for their walk, doing these basics, if you like. And I said to him, have a look at how hard that was to get you to that place. And sometimes we look at, yes, but my friend Richard does this every day and he functions, etc. It's not about the people around you, it's about your own personal journey. And when I kind of compliment guys to some aspect, saying, well, look what you've achieved, they are
Mhm.
very proud of themselves, but they don't express it. You can see, like I said, going to that childlike state. It's like, oh, you've had a bit of a compliment here, but we don't know what to do with that. And I find that really,
Right.
really fascinating. What I've started to learn through looking at kind of guys through addiction side. We're so hard on ourselves, and they kind of do use laughter. Some of them, they kind of do this little nervous giggle at the start, and they're like, oh, I suppose I could be proud of myself. And I find that kind of humorous to some aspect because how awkward we still find that. So thank you so much for kind of giving me your information there. And again, jumping onto your memoir, Wounded Angels, that for me, I know you've written some amazing books, and that one for me really sticks out. And like I said, when we finish this session, I will be ordering a copy of that. I mean,
Thank you.
Wounded Angels, that really stuck out for me, and I'm so keen to read it. And like what you said earlier in chapter 1, it takes us directly into the addiction, the shame, recovery. I mean, you really went forward, and this is what's made me keen to read this. And it's something close to my own personal and professional world, if you like. I've spent many years working around addictions and homelessness, and now within my therapy work, and I've explored some of them, which, as you know, is bloody scary, and it's really hard to be able to break ourselves out of that or dig ourselves out of that hole, so to speak. And one thing I've learned that if if we only focus on the behavior, we can miss kind of pain underneath it. We ask, why can't they just stop? Or perhaps another question is, what is this person trying to escape from? And understanding the pain doesn't, excuse the consequences, if you like. Addictions can cause enormous harm, as we know, but understanding what sits underneath the behavior can completely change kind of like the way we approach recovery. And what would you want somebody who's never experienced addiction to, give them some insight and an understanding about that? Because I mean, you've got massive first-hand lived experience of this. So what would you want somebody who's never experienced addiction, if you like, to understand about that?
Right. Um, I think the main thing, and I gave this some thought because I've heard a similar question. The main thing is that addiction is just as confusing for the addict as it is for everybody else. Like you say, well, why don't you stop? Well, the addict doesn't know why they can't stop any more than you do. And it's like, and it doesn't make any more sense. We're all intelligent people. And, like for me, um, why couldn't I stop for my daughter's sake? You know what I mean? It's like, that
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense at all. She's awesome, she's beautiful, and I want her to be happy and all this stuff. And it's just, it's got its claws in you, right? When people are at and we can get addicted to all kinds of stuff, not only substances, people addictions, food. You see a lot of food addiction in America, screen addictions, porn addictions. We've been talking about that stuff. And
Yeah.
it's just, why are we doing this? I don't have a really good definition of it. Gabor Mate has a really good definition out there somewhere. He talks about it like it's something about it's something you feel compelled to do that's making things worse and you
Mm-hmm.
can't stop anyway. It's like
Sure.
that kind of thing. So yeah, just that I think if you think that the addict has any more insight on it than you do, we don't. It's just like, I don't know why it was, I was in the grip. I look to trauma, look to shame, sure, for the root causes of these things. But again, like as I was saying about what does recovery mean to me, I talked about physical health and mental health and spiritual health and emotional health, and you gave examples of that, like going for a walk or like taking care of yourself, do self care, these kinds of things, seeing a therapist or talking to friends about um, that stuff just goes out the window when you're addicted, I think,
Of
and like you're not
course.
taking care of any of that stuff. People get, you can die because you get so unhealthy in so many ways, just like completely bankrupt, completely, yeah. But please understand that the addict would love to quit too. It's definitely,
Yeah. Of course.
in
No,
the
thanks
lucid
for that.
in the lucid moments, because that's the thing is you'll talk to somebody with an addiction and they'll say, "Well, screw you. I like drinking. I like my cocaine. I have fun at Las Vegas. I like gambling. So leave me alone." That's just a defensive, because like we know we don't want to hear. That's the last thing that we want to hear because that's putting a spotlight on the problem. So you're going to get some defensive. If you say, "Hey, why don't you just quit drinking?" That probably an alcoholic is going to say, "Screw you! I'll drink if I want. I'm an adult." Blah, 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 all that.
Sure.
That's not the truth of a true addict. It might be the truth of somebody who just likes it and doesn't want to hear about it. But the true addict, I think deep down, really wants to quit because I
Yeah.
do.
Sure. But again, you give me so much thought, David. I'm so happy, so happy you're on this podcast to give this talk. And what I found through my own addiction, I'm not saying again, that, everybody's journey is different, as like you say. And when I started kind of working in drug and alcohol services, kind of the craving of me went. Um, and what was really interesting when I was coming across people in my past, you could see some element of resentment from them. There was that kind of like, it sounds really harsh at the time. I was like, "Oh, you're looking well." No offense, they look like crap. They were still on crack. They were still, heroin. They was in a messy place. But then at the same time, I mean, again, it's not stuff I go into, but I was within my music career surrounded by shady people, let's say. But then instantly, straight away, you could see when I said to people I was working in drug and alcohol services, I was doing this. I was like, "What, Garon, you doing that? No, I can't see you doing that. And why would you bother doing that?" And then I had a big one, which come up from a handful of people from where I lived is, "Oh, I've heard that you're a police informant, you're a grass, you're this." And I was just like, where the hell's that come from? Because I'm working alongside the police and I'm working within my addiction side. I knew some people which come into our drop-in services, but I couldn't work with some of them because they were
Mhm.
part of my life, if you like. So,
Of
but
course.
I really felt when I was having that transformation and I started becoming proud of myself, there was elements of resentment from others. And
Mhm.
again, now I kind of are, one question I sometimes change in therapy, if you like, is instead of asking what's wrong with me, sometimes I ask what's happened to me. And I'm not saying, that removes responsibility, it doesn't, but it can move somebody from judging towards curiosity, and curiosity creates space. Space creates choice, if you like, and choice is where change can begin. Does that way of looking at kinda recovery resonate with you at all?
Yeah, definitely. I think, and what's happened is exactly the healing, isn't it? I mean, that, and I'm trying to put together something, um, the words for this. When we see somebody behave in a bad way, like they lash out, or they storm out and slam the door, or something. That it's hard to take a person like that seriously, because it's so kind of over the top and childlike. And if you say, well, what's wrong with that guy? Even in recovery circles, you have something like that, and this person's really struggling, and like they behave like a child would, and you think, well, what kind of an adult is that? Well, what happened to them, and not only in the past, but because I mean, this is going to be like a triggering thing. Like they haven't done the work to see where that's all coming from. Because I used to do stuff like that, and I don't anymore, but I used to, because I was frustrated as hell, and I was really mad at the people who weren't hearing me when I said, well, you're playing a role in this. And I'm like compliant, 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 doing whatever you say, until finally it's my last straw, and I get mad, and then it's like, oh, why is David flipping out? These kinds of things. So what happened to him in the past, but also what's happening to that person in that moment that's making them act like that? Because it's not. I mean, yeah, sometimes you have a very insane person on the streets of New York City who's just plain crazy, and they're, making a scene or something. But generally speaking, it's like we're bouncing off each other, we're having interactions, and, things are being said and done. But then the one person who has the oversized reaction gets the attention and gets the, oh, they're the problem. Whereas it's really, I think, a lot more what's going on in the group dynamics. Because you look at, and when you start to look at it with a little bit more clarity, you start to see there's a lot of micro stuff going on. A lot, and it's not always, not always necessarily just like he's gaslighting you or something, but there's like people can do like kind of love bombing things where they kind of overpraise you and like kind of bring you into the fold, because that's the way they sort of get manipulative. And then you feel like you have a closer connection to that person than you really do. And I got into those kinds of dynamics at times. And then anyway, point being, what happened to them? What happened to him? It's like these are all okay, these are unhealthy ways to be. But where did it all come from? Because we're all, we're reliving childhood stuff, or we're doing generational stuff. We're, you know, reliving these things that we hate. We go through it and we hate it, right? We go,
Sure.
why did I do that again? Why did I get in that relationship again? Why did I have that blow up again? Right?
Yeah, I've
And
done it
it
too
ends
many times.
because until we learn the lesson, I guess, because that's what
Yeah,
it's a weird universe that was, designed here, or not designed, whatever you want to say. But
yeah, it's
it seems to be the way psychology works. It seems to be the
mhm,
way healing works.
yeah. I find
And
that really, really powerful. I'm sorry if I laughed there because, I don't know about yourself, like what you said, I've done it countless times, David. And I'm like, why did you do that? You felt it. You knew there was some element of knowing, if you like. But what do we do? Like, oh, okay, I'm gonna go off and learn some more.
yeah,
So I find that
yeah,
really interesting. So
yeah.
many of us do that. It's just unbelievable. And
I actually find that stuff very spiritual. Like, to me,
mm,
that's what spirituality is like that we can heal through these, like, and this sort of and reflective stuff, meditative stuff, and get to know ourselves better, and then actually interact like we were supposed to. Because I think we were designed to interact in a healthy way, but society is so sickened, and this generational the stuff we're learning is so just off. It's not
yeah.
right, you know?
Sure, I find that.
Like,
Yeah, that's really. Thanks for giving me that insight. You've given me so much to reflect on today, David. Big time. And we've obviously talked a lot about the past, if you like. So we've gone through obviously addiction, recovery, shame, identity, but your works also look forward. So we're looking at kind of towards a science fiction, if you like. And this blows my mind, by the way. So I'm not going to sit and pretend I'm the expert. So we're looking at the technology, the artificial intelligence, consciousness, and
nice.
the future. And I
Yep.
think that raises really fascinating question. Perhaps, when we imagine the future, we're actually asking, questions about ourselves. So let's, if you're happy to have a talk about the Solarian Deep. I've read a little bit part of that,
Okay.
and what drew you towards like the science fiction side of things?
Well, I've always been a sci-fi guy, I mean, I grew up on Star Wars and Star Trek, and I read sci-fi books, so it was natural that I would gravitate towards writing that. But I think some small part of me has always been hopeful That's one thing. Even in the darkest times, I've always felt this kind of weird, like, hope, and I think that's why I write sci-fi, 'cause I write it with an eye towards, like, if we could all get along, if things could be okay now, what would the future look like? How much better could it be? And I don't write, or I try not to write, like, dystopian, like, there's a lot of that. Like,
Yeah,
the world is how it is, and then we've got this sci-fi stuff, which is just like, and then it's gonna get way worse, and it's like, "Oh, great," that's maybe so, but we're watching it in real time, right? We don't need the fiction.
yeah,
We're watching everything get dystopian as we speak. Idiocracy is a movie that's become a documentary, sad to say. But, anyway, uh, yeah, so anyway, I've always written sci-fi and, Solarian Deep, there's a lot of themes to it, not fitting in is in there is a big one. It could 2 of the main characters are orphans, and they've been sort of, cast aside by society and not given a chance and not given the advantages and kind of, scapegoated, similar to my story, and, turns out they were more powerful than they realized, and they had more influence than they realized, and, a lot of my work, a lot of my fiction writing has to do with that, like, the little guy up against the machine, and what are we gonna do about it? Because like, maybe that was kind of my feelings for through a lot of life, like, here I am up against the machine, what am I gonna do about it? Yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
That's brilliant. You got so much perspective in it, especially the future. And again, we're again us in a lot of therapists are talking as well. This kind of brings us onto the big one, the artificial intelligence, which is going on, and I'm aware of your views and your awareness around it. Again, this is why I'm so glad I got you on, because I find your views on this really fascinating, and we're living through kind of like a fascinating moment with AI, if you like, where it's becoming part of everyday life. You look at the mobile phones. We had a discussion about that earlier, and
Uh-huh.
it's creating things, it's writing, it's analyzing, it's communicating, if you like, and it's
Yep.
forcing us to ask some pretty kind of fundamental questions, if you like. What is consciousness, and what is creativity? What is intelligence, and what makes
Yep.
someone human? And what kind of fascinates you kind of the most about AI? Because again, you being the sci-fi guy, we're looking at futuristic, and I really loved it, by the way, the two orphans in this world, and drawing some of your own story in that. I find that amazing. Like, again, it's so many books I got from guests at the moment. I've got to chip away at, because again, that's really pulled me into kind of seeing how that comes out, if you like. So, what kind of fascinates you the most about AI?
Well, yeah, fascinated and horrified at the same time. Um, and yeah, the Solarian Deep, there's not a lot of AI in there. There is technology, but it's more relationship based and sort of evolutionary too. And it's interesting. I did another podcast where they were asking me about there's some really healthy and loving parents in the Solarian Deep. I don't know if you got that far yet, but I thought it was so funny because I said, "Oh my God, that goes to the inner child stuff, that goes to like the loving inner parent and reparenting yourself and wanting parents that are actually know what they're doing and are good, not my parents knew what they were doing, but point being, we're not that healthy, right? And so I actually wrote those characters into the book. Now for the AI stuff, I wrote one book, Emergence, which is based on like robot coming of age AI stuff, and now my upcoming book, The Vibrance, is going to be published in a few months, and that's totally humans and AI coexisting, the co-creating, AI becoming sentient and all that kind of stuff. And I think that's about my views on what is this relationship that we're like kind of coming up on. And you were commenting, I think before we started rolling, about people coming to the session and saying, well, my analyst ChatGPT told me to don't worry about the shame so much, or
Yeah,
right, and that's dangerous. And I think a lot of lonely people can get, and I do that. I use it for business. It makes my website, it, books my podcasts, these kinds of things. So it's like I
mm,
tend to chat with it and so it's like, oh, this is getting kind of unhealthy, right? It doesn't seem right.
yeah,
But then when somebody's really, really not in a good place to begin with, I think it can be quite
yeah,
dangerous. But I mean,
yeah,
it's a tool, it's neither good nor bad, it's what we do with it, and so I'm hoping that my stuff will maybe inspire people to see it for what it is, because actually the main character in the Vibrance very much finds his grounding and his inner health in order to use AI in a healthy way. So, I mean, my fiction and nonfiction is really starting to meld together into
I,
something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I was going to say it's coming together there, isn't it? Which
it
is
is.
really great. That's a hell of a journey where you're kind of looking at different sides because you got your fiction, non-fiction, and you wasn't so particular great to going down that road. But your journey alone, how interesting that they're coming together now, and whatever the universe purpose is there, obviously it seems to be heading in the right direction, which is great. And
I think
kind
so,
of
yeah.
I find it really fascinating you managed to draw them together, and that kind of brings us on to that kind of open question in regards to do you think AI could ultimately bring people closer together? Because we discussed earlier before the show about lockdown, and I was quite observant at that time, and I was working in the streets of Oxford. I was getting people into shelters, hotels, and that side, and it to be honest, it was kind of like a normal day in the shelter, to be honest, but quieter because there was no traffic. I found it quite pleasant to some aspect, but at the same time, and what you said earlier is it's I had this small glimmer of hope, and being spiritual is what we are. I had this. Maybe this is a moment we will come together as one. And I don't know about you, when I saw how we behaved, again, I was like, oh, I was really kind of disappointed at how we dealt with things. It was all one for themselves. People fighting over toilet roll for Christ's sake. And I just like, I was so disappointed because I was expecting this. Oh, here we go. We're going to come as one, if you like. And that kind of
Right.
really disappointed me at how society helped. I was working a lot of the times. I had very little time to myself. But at the same time, when I sat back and observed, I was like, we really like this. Why can't we help each other? Why can't we come together? And we didn't. So do you feel now, we discussed about the mobile phone and habits. But do you
Mhm.
think AI could ultimately bring people closer together, or could it make you explored earlier about the loneliness side of things, or could could AI bring us together, or could it make us our loneliness, if you like, worse?
Well, there's a lot there, and I think, well, first of all, I would, in fairness to the human race, we were all under a tremendous amount of stress during COVID, and that was not our fault, but the way that the governments mismanaged and mishandled things, and but then even government officials were probably under a whole lot of strain and stress. It was unprecedented. So, like, and it's funny because, like, for me, I'm an introvert, right? I dealt with it pretty I was okay, except, I mean, in some ways I was freaking out because I was in the early stages of recovery. So I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
what am I gonna do? How am I gonna, get face to face with people?" And I ended up figuring out a way. But for me, it was okay. But for other people, for extroverts especially, it's like, they were in prison, right? And so
Mm,
I think that was, maybe a big psyop or something. It felt like a huge human experimentation thing. But man, yeah, I agree with you that these disasters don't generally bring out, well, it depends on how big the disaster is. When the big earthquake in Japan seemed to bring out the good in a lot of people, um, but it was manageable. It said COVID was much bigger. It's more like a war or something. So there's that. And humans are humaning, right? We do what we do. But as far as the AI, I would say technology is thanks to technology, we're having this conversation, right?
of
And I'm
course.
making great use of the technology in order to build my business and to sell my books and to get connected with as many people as I can so that I can do more of it. And eventually, if I am successful enough and I have the budget, you better believe I will be going to New York and England and France and wherever I can go and doing face to face conversations and connecting, right?
Um,
We do this because we have to.
yeah.
And so, but it's enabling me to do this. I'm able to talk to your listeners about my story and my writing, and so technology is amazing. It's crazy amazing. I've published 6 books by myself, I mean, that's just amazing. But at the same time, it's how we use it. And, I think we're heavily addicted to it. Screen addictions are real.
Yeah.
So I highly
Yeah.
recommend, try at least, have an hour a day where you go jogging and leave the phone or something, if you can. So yeah, I really don't know. It remains to be seen, but hopefully
Mm.
AI won't kill us all or
I don't know why I've always thought of Terminator, David. Every time I'm kind of like,
well,
I don't know why. I just keep, we never know. It'd be interesting to see if it is possible. Again, this is going well out of my realms. If it can create its own kind of
yeah.
consciousness or something.
Okay, well,
For me,
if I mean, we are handing it the keys. Like, that's the one thing.
yeah,
If Terminator is to come true, we definitely did it to ourselves.
sure,
Like,
yeah.
there's nobody doing anything to, like, push that down or stop it,
Well, I think
far from it.
everyone will be fighting then, David, to try and figure out who Sarah Connor is, so we can find some answers. It is really fascinating how it's going to go, and who knows? Let's kind of see what it brings, if you like, and again, kind of exploring obviously with spirituality and science and spirituality, and I find kind of like the relationship between science and spirituality quite fascinating. I mean, the
Yeah.
science side blows my mind. I'm not saying I'm an expert on spiritualism because I'm not. Um, but they're often presented as kind of opposites, if you like. So, but perhaps they're asking different questions. So, for example, science asks, "How does this work?" Where spiritually asks, "What does this mean?" And perhaps human beings need both, and we want to understand kind of like the mechanism or but we also want meaning. I mean, where do you sit, obviously, with spirituality yourself, David? I apologize for firing these questions, but I just find the different
That's fine.
areas you're in really fascinating. So, well, where do you sit? Because you mentioned about following Google girls at the start of your journey, and you decided to kind of think, well, that didn't quite work for me, so I'm finding my path there. So,
Uh-huh.
where do you sit with spirituality yourself?
Yeah, I don't pretend to know any more than any other person, but I don't think any person knows more than I do. That's how I feel about it. Nobody can prove any of it, and if you think that you can prove it, then you don't understand the word proof. And that's
Sure.
where science is all about what's provable, right? And if there is a God, if there is whatever it is, then that entity, that being made it unprovable on purpose. I mean, that's how, and so okay, so it's not provable. So, but for me, it's like talk about the word miracle, right? Like the fact that I was able to heal to me is a miracle because I felt so deficient for most of my life and really brokenhearted about it because I wanted to be likable, I wanted to be lovable, I wanted to have friends. Now I have all those things. That was and I tried for decades unsuccessfully. You want to talk about failure, right? Spirituality played a big role in that. So for me, maybe I'm brainwashed or delusional. I really don't care. I'm not out to convince anybody of what they should believe, but I definitely have some ideas of like some bigger thing out there that seems to be like when I'm letting it, when I let go and sort of let the synchronicities flow, good things tend to happen. And so, that's how it has worked for me. But I can only speak for myself, and I don't claim to have any kind of knowledge, and I'm not going to be running the Vatican anytime soon. They've already got somebody in that job anyway, so he can do his thing, and I'll write my sci-fi and my healing books.
I really love that, and again, that the synchronicity is something I was learning in my early stages of the counselling and psychotherapy. So I find that so fascinating. You recognise that. There's so many people do, and again, kind of you're speaking about obviously going to the beach earlier to do your grounding, your place where you go to recharge, if you like. And and kind of what I found over the years through my own battles, through relationship breakdowns, through my addiction, friendships coming to ends. And as you know yourself, we go into that kind of loneliness mode or what I'm good enough. But I've really found nature for myself has become a real important part, even of my own work. I only do a handful of clients currently at the moment where I do a walk talk therapy, which is kind of showing how different conversations can feel when you're walking alongside somebody rather than sitting opposite. And the landscape becomes kind of part of that process. You can walk in silence, you don't have to always maintain eye contact, and you can allow your attention to kind of move, if you like. And sometimes the silence itself can create space. And do you have somewhere we scraped the surface of this earlier? Do you have somewhere in nature where you feel most connected within yourself?
I do, absolutely I do, and it's very close to where I live right now.
Mhm.
In fact, I did have what I would call a spiritual awakening in June of 2020, so about 5 years ago. I wrote about that, it's on my Substack actually, you can read I wrote a little article about it, and it's a beach, it's Tokyo Bay, and it's about 15 minutes by bicycle from here, and I was there this morning. So, like, I go almost every day, it's part of my routine. My mornings are very, based on bike riding, physical health, meditation and reflection, that kind of thing, prayer. Um,
Excellent.
yeah, so for sure. And I actually felt really off last year. I was traveling and I had amazing experiences, but I wasn't able to get grounded like I can at home. So it's like it was tough for me last year. It brought out a lot of inner child moments too. It's like the second book is on the way because of that. But yeah, nature is huge for me. I'm an ocean guy. I'm a Pisces. I'm Stellarian Deep. I wrote an underwater sci-fi thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, but just the bay is amazing, and there's also a view of Tokyo from there, and a little kind of a koi pond, very Japanese park right off the side of it. So yeah, yeah, that's totally my jam.
Sure. And again, I can say again, I think, I really would after the podcast, definitely love to be able to keep in contact with you because very similar in the background of what we've been through. And I really thank you for your time. And I love that because nature, what I found is that nature doesn't really demand that we rush. I mean, a tree doesn't compare itself to another tree, and it goes through seasons of growth, the stillness, the loss, even renewal. And perhaps we're not that different, and we have seasons too, and sometimes we need to kind of stop expecting ourselves to be in the summer, if you like, when we're actually in the winter. So
Yep.
I really, again, this kind of becoming whole, if you like, whatever that is, or whatever our views of that is. And that brings me back to a lot of Carl Jung stuff about, again, I keep using this stuff with individuation because I've picked up his books again, and even though his theories blows my mind, I can really relate to some of the things you're saying. And I'm not saying Young's theory is always correct or etc. I mean, again, these are theories and ideas, they're not facts. And becoming whole and not becoming perfect, and not becoming kind of somebody else, but becoming more fully ourselves, if you like. And that includes the parts we don't particularly like, our wounded parts, our frightened parts, our angry parts, our vulnerable parts, and even the parts we spent years hiding. And does that idea of becoming kind of whole resonate with some of your own journey there?
Yeah, definitely. I think so. And when you're talking about seasons, it's really interesting. I just today, and I was doing a bit of future tripping, as I often do.
I love that
Yeah,
future
right,
tripping.
right. And no, but here's the thing. I said to myself, I think I'll just hang out in August for a while. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, okay, and you're also talking about metaphysically, right, or emotionally, like we have different seasons. But I think just being in the season that we're in now, it's summer, it's hot. I'm adjusting to it, in many different ways, that puts me more in the moment and more able to, like, enjoy this full day and that kinda thing. So and yeah, as far as life seasons, they say, you don't appreciate what you have until it's gone, but I try not to be like that. I really do, savor moments with people that I care about. I savor moments in nature these days as much as I can. And I'm lucky because I have time. I have, I'm busy with my writing, but it's the kind of thing where I can step away anytime, you
Hmm.
know?
Sure.
So yeah, and getting groovy with the trees and getting in the moment is a big thing for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, and I really kind of, I love what you said is that obviously getting groovy through the trees. I love that because people always say to me, what do you do in your time out? I said, I go and sit with the trees,
Mhm.
and some people look at me quite funnily, and I'm like, I said I sit with that just so I can kind of sit, so I haven't got any blockage, I've got no distractions, and I have my notepad and pen. I've always done that, and sometimes the right ideas come to me in that time, and I've got no distractions around me. And I always find as well, it's really bad of me saying this, when I'm in certain areas, I like going out before the dog walkers, I like it being my space. And it's really interesting when I finish and I'm coming back and I'm seeing someone walking their dog in the early hours. Sometimes it can put me out a little bit because it's like I feel I own the land and it should be all mine.
Right.
It's really interesting how I feel that sometimes, and kind of with this wholeness, again, we've gone through very similar with our spiritual journey, going through the girl stage and that side. And what I'm kind of interested in, do you think we ever actually arrive, if you like, or like you said, you see these people who have these quick fix techniques, and then they're a number worth one author. Don't get me wrong, I'm not kind of materialistic in any way, but you know what, my bank balance could be better like anyone else's. But again,
Right.
I kind of, do you these people, I'm all for them, great. I'd love to get some of their ideas so I could be in a similar position to them, but still on my
Right.
own journey. But do you think we actually arrive, or is it becoming ourselves something that continues for as long as we're alive?
Yeah. So I d- I think I said earlier, I don't discount the people who say that they've had that happen. You
Hmm.
know, some people make such claims and it sounds extreme. Now that I look at what healing looks like for me and other people that I've walked with, it sounds extreme, but I don't say that that's not possible. I heard somebody suggested something about, well, they did all the work in a past life, and that's why that happened. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's the whole kind of thing. We come here for a reason. Who knows? But for me, it's been a work in progress. It's been a slow journey. I certainly don't feel 100%. I know that I can be better. Again, future tripping, that whole thing, worrying about next year. Why? Why am I not enjoying the fact that things are going nicely? And I do, and I am, but still, I'm not 100% present all the time. I make mistakes all the time, and I feel a lot of negative. I don't know if I want to say negative, painful emotions. I feel still, fear, not shame. I did a lot of work on shame last year, and I actually used AI to help me with it. So interestingly enough, I'll tell you about that sometime. It's really interesting.
Lovely.
But it was just AI gave me the suggestion for a scenario to run. And so I feel a lot less shame than I used to. But yeah, I mean, all that. But I'm much better than I was. So I think you can definitely get much better. And I could see myself getting to a point where I'm really, doing okay. But, I think then I would still be doing the routines, because that's part of it, and talking about it and writing about it. Although I don't know how useful, like at a certain point, if I'm really doing well, a book about me doing well probably wouldn't be that useful for too many people. Do you know what I mean? It's like
Sure.
so maybe then I'll stick to fiction. But for now,
Sure.
I've got plenty of nonfiction to write because I've got stories unfolding as we speak. I've got a follow up
Brilliant.
to Wounded Angels called The Inner Child Unleashed, which is
Wow.
coming out soon. And that went from my divorce, which happened about 18 months ago, all the way to, and I didn't know this until it happened, but I had uh, a healing afternoon with my ex wife about 6 weeks ago. My daughter arranged it. She's her mom, and the chapter one is my divorce, and then literally the book concluded itself through no fault of my own, like it just happened with a healing moment. And so it's all the things that happened in between there, which was a crazy adventure. I went to Vietnam, I went to Thailand, I went to Indonesia. I was playing drums, I was on stage, I was meeting interesting people, and I was also terrified and kind of running away from the divorce, because and so, yeah, it's ongoing for sure.
Well, I really do appreciate that, and kind of, first of all, thank you so much for one giving me your time, and definitely, I've 100% love to keep in contact with you, and sincerely, all the best with the new book coming up. I'm looking forward to buying the first one. I will be purchasing it from Amazon. I'll be getting it delivered. It normally comes in a couple of days. I'm really, really keen to read that book, and already you're starting the second part. I'm like, I kind of want to have a quick flick through the late one, but I know I can't go near it. I need to. And what I admire about that is that the book, it sounds like that you don't mess about, you dive straight in. I really admire that. So I want to kind of want to finish with kind of like one final question, if you like, and I want to give you plenty of space for this one. So imagine somebody listening right now. maybe they're sitting in their car because they don't feel ready to go into their home, or feeling they've lost somebody they love, struggling with addictions, ashamed of something, they've done. And maybe they're questioning who they are, but they're exhausted from pretending every day is okay. They could be in survival mode. And maybe they spend years, as we know, believing they simply have to keep everything all together. And perhaps today, for the first time, they've admitted something to themselves. I can't keep doing this on my own. If they could hear, some advice from David, well, if they could hear that thing from David for you today, what would you like to tell them?
You know yourself better than you think you do. That's the first thing I would say. You are not as bad as you think you are, if you think you're bad. The inner critic can be extremely harsh, but that's a part of you that's coming from trying to survive. And there is hope. If I could get better, I think pretty much, I mean, I don't want to say anybody. I know some people are really, really broken, but I mean, recovery is possible. And so it's a long and painful process, but it's so worth it. It's really worth it, because if you're in pain, even low level pain every day, and you really think I really need to make a change, or I want to make a change, it's probably not going to get better on its own. That's the thing. I think we hope, we hold out hope that it'll get better on its own, but I think it takes an actual commitment, an actual effort. I'm going to do this no matter what. And then there's a million resources. I mean, there's books, there's people, there's therapy, I mean, reach out, support groups, that kind of thing. There's so many people out there who've been through it and are going through it and like to help each other. That's the one thing, that the whole community of man thing, like maybe that didn't work out in COVID so well. But when it comes to somebody who's been struggling and they'd like to, share what they've learned, like I'm doing here and like you do, there's people out there. So don't give up on yourself. And yeah, you're not as bad as you
Excellent.
think you are. Yeah.
Really appreciate, David, and with your work you do, because again, as I say to any of my guests, I like to promote your work. So how do people get hold of David, and how do they find David out? Because obviously you've reminded us that healing isn't about erasing our past, and it's not kind of pretending difficult things didn't happen, and addiction didn't happen, etc. So how do people get hold of your books? How do people get hold of David? How do people reach out to David? I've put all the information in the description already, but
Yeah.
how do they reach out to you, David? If they, do you know what, David's really giving me some insight here. How do they get hold of David?
It's really easy. daviddeanehaskell.com. That's my website. And just make sure you spell the middle name with an E at the end. It's an old family name, but daviddeanehaskell.com is everything I've got. I don't have pen names. I don't, I'm probably shooting myself in the foot, right? Because I've got my science fiction and I've got my healing inner child books, and it's all in the same place. It's all under the same name. And so, yeah, that's how you find me, daviddeanehaskell.com. You can sign up for my Substack newsletter there. You can reach out there. You can email me from there. So, and you can buy my books there too.
Brilliant, lovely. I will be obviously promoting the work you do as well, and obviously the podcast will be there. And sincerely, hand on heart, David, I'm so grateful we've been able to have this connection. Like we said earlier, I'm meeting such fantastic people who are so inspiring and moving to me. I can only hope that somebody out there is going to relate to this story and many of the others. And again, so thank you so much for giving me your time, and I'm so keen to read your book. It's I really am excited about it, just to see, because I know that you're going to hit head on, and I'm fascinated by that side. So thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate your story. It's been really reflective for me and really moving, and 100% I'll definitely be in touch. And like I said, if there's any time you need to pick my brain at all, feel free to do so. So thank you so much for joining me in the Green Room podcast. So if you'd like to get in contact with David, he's giving you information. There will be plenty of information in regards to the description as well. And thank you for joining me here in the Green Room. And for everybody listening, if today's conversation has resonated with you, I'd really encourage you to explore David's work, his books, his writing, his ideas, and the stories he's continuing to tell. And I will put David's links in the episode description so you can explore the work for yourself. And if something from today's conversation has stirred something within inside you, don't necessarily put it away. Notice it, sit with it. Maybe write something down or talk to someone you trust. Ask yourself a question you've been avoiding. You don't have to solve the entire life today. Sometimes you just need to take it to the next step. And I'm going to leave this with people here in regards to what Carl Rogers, one of the famous psychologists, said, is that the curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change. And I think that's something worth sitting with. And acceptance isn't giving up. It's not saying this is all I'll ever be. It's saying that this is where I am right now. And once we know where we are, we can begin to deciding where we want to go. So thank you again so much, David, for your time. I really appreciate this, and hopefully it gives you a rest of your evening over there in Japan. And like I say, I'll definitely be in contact. I'm so keen to read the book, and thank you so much for your time and being part of the Green Room podcast. It's just so moving for me, and this is my dream happening, that I'm speaking to inspiring people like you, which I didn't think was ever going to happen. So thank you, hand on heart, for you giving me your time here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, the feeling is very mutual. I'm really grateful for this and for our connection. And I would love to talk to you again many times. Yeah.
Lovely.
Thank you.
100%. Thank you again, David.